The door of the slave quarters creaked on the rainy night, an echo like a grim lament cutting through the darkness. The overseer, John the Whip Burton, dragged the 5 girls by their thin arms, his eyes bloodshot with sadism as he pushed them inside. Mariana, Isabella, Joaquina, Caterina, and Teresa, all just 10 years old, shivered in soaked rags that barely covered their frail bodies. The barracks, immersed in shadows, held the oppressive presence of the chained men, awaiting the execution of their unwilling lives. "You're going to lie with these strong bulls, you little whores," John Burton roared, lighting a lamp that illuminated the girls' terrified faces. "One child from each of you, or I'll break your legs at the whipping post tomorrow." Colonel Elias Beaufort, master of the sugarcane plantation in the heart of Louisiana, needed more hands for the cane fields. And girls like these, daughters of newly arrived Africans, were seen only as instruments of reproduction. For him, pregnancy was not a choice, but a commodity to be exploited without any shame or humanity. "No, Mr. Burton, we're just children. It hurts." Mariana's voice broke in despair, but determination still burned in her dark eyes. John Burton responded with a violent slap that threw her against Domingo, the tall man from Angola, who caught her with a sad, sympathetic gaze. The first whimpers began to echo, mixed with the thunder that cracked outside as if the sky itself were weeping. The girls were distributed like livestock, each one separated from her companions, forced to face a cruel fate that no child should ever know. That night would be only the beginning of a story of resistance that no one could have foreseen. 5 broken girls who would transform into the oppressor's nightmare. The sun rose slowly on the horizon, its first light filtering timidly through the cracks in the quarters. The sounds of the sugarcane plantation began to echo in the distance, marking the start of another day of brutal work. Mariana awoke, and as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she remembered the silent promise they had all made the night before, to resist until the end. Without making a sound, she got up and looked at the other girls, still wrapped in ragged blankets, their small bodies aching from the night's violence. Isabella was the first to wake. Her eyes had an intense gleam, as if they held all the hope that insisted on being born even in that place of darkness. "We must prepare," Mariana whispered, her lips still cut from the slap. Isabella nodded, already analyzing every movement around them, every possible path, every gesture of the overseers. The need to act was born not just from survival instinct, but from a profound refusal to be pieces in an inhuman game. The physical pain they felt was real and intense, but the pain of the soul, the one that tore deeper than any whip, united them in an inexplicable way. Caterina, the quietest of the group, held Teresa's hand, squeezing it gently. The touch was light, but it carried the strength of a silent manifesto. They were sisters now, not of blood, but of shared pain. "What's going to happen to us?" Caterina asked, pulling the blanket around herself like a fragile shield against the world's cruelty. "We're going to escape," Mariana answered with surprising firmness. "But first, we need to know this place well. Every corner, every schedule, every habit." As the morning work began, the girls mixed into the movement of the plantation. The men in the fields, many of them chained to their own fate, looked at them with mute, impotent sympathy. They knew the cruelty the little ones faced and felt the rage bloom in their hardened hearts. But the fear of the overseer and Colonel Beaufort paralyzed any impulse to protect them. Throughout that day, as they worked under the scorching sun, Mariana, Isabella, and the others observed John Burton's every move. He moved through the field with unbearable arrogance, handing out orders, blows, and lashes that echoed like a macabre symphony across the plantation. The girls registered everything in silence, each act of violence feeding the flame of resistance growing inside them. "He comes here around 3 in the afternoon," Mariana whispered to Isabella during a brief pause. "It's the last check before the shift change. Maybe we can do something." The Louisiana Sugar Belt in 1853 was one of the wealthiest and most brutal regions in the South. The plantations stretched over rolling hills, their green cane fields contrasting with the blue sky. But this natural beauty hid stories of horror. The Bon Secours plantation, property of Colonel Elias Beaufort, was known for its particularly cruel treatment of the enslaved. The colonel, a tall, burly man of 58, took pride in his rigorous discipline. His small eyes, almost always bloodshot from an excess of whiskey, showed no compassion. He had inherited the plantation from his father and expanded it through methods that mixed ambition and brutality in equal measure. "A slave only learns from the lash," he used to say in conversation with other planters, raising his glass in toasts to his own cruelty. John Burton, his head overseer, had earned his nickname the Whip for his special ability to split a man's skin with just 3 precise strikes. Short but muscular, with a scar cutting across his left cheek, he was feared even by the other overseers. His specialty was breaking new slaves, especially the most resistant ones, and now he took special pleasure in tormenting the children. 3 weeks had passed since that first night of horror. The girls developed their own language, made of subtle glances and gestures. It was a form of communication the masters could not understand or control. In the quarters at night, they exchanged experiences in whispers, seeking comfort in one another. Joanna, an older enslaved woman who worked in the kitchen of the big house, began to protect them discreetly. At 45, having been through every kind of suffering, she saw in the girls a chance to preserve something that slavery tried to destroy: humanity. "You are strong, girls," Joanna would whisper, bringing them scraps of food hidden in her torn pockets. "Stronger than they imagine." It was Joanna who taught Mariana the secrets of the swamp herbs. Which ones could heal, which caused deep sleep, which brought on temporary illnesses. This was ancestral knowledge that had survived the Atlantic crossing, passed from generation to generation like a precious treasure. "My grandmother used to say, 'Knowledge is the only thing they can't chain,'" Joanna told Mariana, showing her how to identify the poisonous manioc root, which was deadly when raw. One day, Joaquina didn't show up for work in the fields. She had been taken to the overseer's house during the night and returned only at dawn, her body marked and her eyes empty. Teresa tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't speak, wouldn't cry. She just stared at the horizon, as if her soul had fled to some distant place. That was the last straw. That night, gathered in a dark corner of the quarters, the girls finalized their plan. It wouldn't just be an escape, it would be a liberation. And not just for them. "We'll take everyone who wants to come," affirmed Mariana, now 11 years old, but with the determination of an ancestral warrior. The plan required patience. Joanna helped them collect and prepare herbs to mix into the overseer's food, causing drowsiness. Domingo, who had been forced on them that first night, was now a secret ally, committed to helping them when the time came. The days at Bon Secours plantation followed their brutal rhythm: wake before the sun, work until dusk, receive punishment for any reason or no reason at all. But beneath this seemingly unchanging routine, the resistance network quietly grew, woven by 5 girls who refused to accept their fate. On new moon nights, Joanna would take them in small groups outside the quarters, teaching them the paths of the cypress swamp, how to navigate by the stars, how to find water and food, essential knowledge for when the time to escape arrived. The original plan was simple: wait for the 4th of July celebrations, when the masters and overseers would be distracted by festivities and whiskey, and then flee through the swamp toward the maroon community of Cypress Hollow, whose existence they knew only from whispered rumors. But fate intervenes in unexpected ways. 3 months after that first night, something happened that would change everything. A new group of enslaved people arrived at the plantation, bought at auction after a neighboring plantation went bankrupt. Among them was Papa Antoine, a wise old man, his back covered in whip scars, but with an untamable spark in his eyes. Papa Antoine had been a warrior in his homeland before being captured and brought to America. Despite years of bondage, he maintained an impressive dignity. He soon realized that something was brewing among the girls, and approached them with caution and respect. "I've seen how you look, how you speak without words," he told Mariana one night. "I know that look. It's the look of one who has not accepted the chains." He had valuable information. He knew the region well, knew shortcuts through the swamp that few knew, and had contacts with the Maroons. But more importantly, he knew how to turn an escape into true freedom. "It's not enough to run, daughters," he explained. "You have to know where to go, how to stay, how to defend what is yours." Papa Antoine's arrival brought new elements to the plan. It would not just be a desperate flight, but the beginning of something bigger. The girls began to dream not only of freedom, but of their own place, a community. As winter arrived in Louisiana, bringing colder nights and even harder work days, the resistance network grew silently, word by word, gesture by gesture. More people joined the plan. Joanna from the kitchen, Papa Antoine with his wisdom, Domingo and other strong men, some older women who knew the secrets of healing and protection. John Burton noticed something different in the air, a subtle tension, a charged silence. He increased his vigilance, doubling the punishments for minor infractions, trying to break whatever was growing under his nose. "The slaves are too quiet," he commented to another overseer. "When they get quiet, they're plotting." In response, Colonel Beaufort ordered random nightly searches of the quarters, interrupting the slaves' already scarce sleep. During one of these searches, they found small bags of herbs hidden in Joanna's cot. The punishment was immediate and brutal: 50 lashes in the public square to serve as an example. The girls watched in horror as Joanna, who had become a mother to them, received blow after blow. Her blood stained the dirt ground, but she did not scream, did not beg. Her eyes met Mariana's in the crowd, and in that look there was a clear message: keep going. Joanna survived, but she was severely weakened. The plan had to be accelerated. They could no longer wait for the 4th of July. Every day that passed brought more risk of discovery. "It has to be on the next new moon," Papa Antoine insisted, 4 nights from today. The tension was palpable. Mariana, now the group's undisputed leader despite her age, passed coded messages to the allies. Isabella, with her sharp mind, recalculated routes and times. Caterina and Teresa cared for Joanna, trying to strengthen her wounded body for the journey. Joaquina, who had rarely spoken since her abuse, became the group's eyes and ears, observing everything with an almost supernatural attention. On the eve of the planned escape, the unexpected happened. One of the overseers, suspecting something, followed Joaquina to a secret meeting with Domingo. He heard fragments of the conversation about the escape and ran to inform John Burton. The reaction was immediate. Joaquina was dragged to the whipping post, lashed and interrogated brutally. Even under torture, she remained silent, protecting the plan and her companions. Her resistance infuriated John Burton, who intensified the violence until she passed out. "This girl knows something," he shouted to the other overseers. "Double the watch. No one leaves the quarters tonight." The plan was in jeopardy. With extra guards posted and Joaquina locked in the punishment shed, it seemed impossible to proceed. The girls, gathered in a dark corner of the quarters, faced the most difficult moment of their young conspiracy. "We can't abandon her," Teresa said, tears streaming down her face. "And we won't," Mariana replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "We change the plan." The new plan was risky, almost suicidal. Instead of slipping away in the darkness, they would create a diversion. A controlled fire in the cotton storage sheds, far enough from the quarters not to hurt anyone, but big enough to draw the attention of all the overseers. While the confusion reigned, a small group led by Papa Antoine would rescue Joaquina from the punishment shed. The rest of the escapees would meet at the river's edge, where hidden canoes awaited them. "It's too dangerous," Domingo warned, sweat pouring down his forehead. "We're already dying here a little every day," Mariana interrupted. "I'd rather die trying to be free." The night arrived, bringing a starless sky, perfect for the plan. The tension was so thick it could almost be touched. In the quarters, people awaited the agreed-upon signal. 3 hoots of an owl in succession. Papa Antoine, hidden near the cotton sheds, used a flint and steel to create the spark that would ignite the strategically placed dry straw. The flames grew quickly, illuminating the night with an orange glare. The shouts of alarm were not long in coming. "Fire! Fire in the sheds!" Chaos erupted immediately. Overseers ran, trying to organize slaves into a line with water buckets. Colonel Beaufort, awakened by the turmoil, came out of the big house shouting contradictory orders, his face twisted with fury. Taking advantage of the confusion, Mariana and Isabella moved silently toward the punishment shed. They found only one guard, who was easily neutralized with a powder Joanna had taught them to prepare, a mixture of herbs that, when blown in the eyes, caused burning and temporary blindness. Joaquina was semi-conscious, her small body covered in open wounds. They carried her carefully, whispering words of encouragement. "We're going to freedom, sister," Mariana murmured in her friend's ear. "Hold on just a little longer." Meanwhile, other small groups crept through the darkness toward the meeting point on the river. Joanna, supported by Teresa and Caterina, moved slowly, each step a painful effort. The plan seemed to be working until John Burton, smarter than the other overseers, realized the strategy. Leaving the fire behind, he quickly gathered a few armed men and set off toward the river. "The slaves are running!" he bellowed. "They're going for the canoes." Mariana's group carrying Joaquina heard the shouts and quickened their pace, ignoring the pain and exhaustion. Freedom was so close they could taste it in the humid night air. They reached the riverbank at almost the same time as John Burton and his men. A confrontation was inevitable. Domingo and other strongmen positioned themselves at the front, improvising weapons with oars and pieces of wood. "Take the girls and the weak ones," Domingo shouted to Papa Antoine. "We'll hold them here." Mariana hesitated, not wanting to abandon those who risked their lives for them. "Go, child," Domingo insisted. "Someone has to make it there to tell our story. Someone has to live free." The fight that followed was brief and violent. The enslaved, armed only with their courage and makeshift tools, faced men with firearms and whips. Many fell, but their sacrifice was not in vain. The canoes carrying the children, the elderly, and the wounded managed to pull away, carried by the current far from the banks of the Bon Secours plantation. Mariana looked back one last time, seeing Domingo fall under John Burton's blows. Silent tears streamed down her face, but in her heart, along with the pain, a promise grew. Someday she would return. Someday she would bring justice. The canoes descended the river all night, guided by Papa Antoine's instructions. At dawn they reached a remote bend, where they were to enter the dense swamp to begin the long trek to the maroon community of Cypress Hollow. That first night of freedom was marked by a contradictory mix of emotions: joy for the successful escape, grief for those left behind, fear of what lay ahead, and hope for a new life. In the morning light, they counted the survivors. 23 people had managed to escape, including the 5 girls, Papa Antoine, Joanna, some strong men, women, and other children. "We must keep moving," Papa Antoine said, assessing the group's condition. "They will come after us as soon as they organize a search." The journey through the swamp was arduous. Joanna and Joaquina, still weak from the torture, needed frequent breaks. Food was scarce, obtained only thanks to Papa Antoine's knowledge of edible plants and small animals that could be trapped. After 5 days of walking, with bruised feet and exhausted bodies, they spotted smoke from fires on the horizon. Papa Antoine smiled, recognizing the signs. "It's Cypress Hollow," he announced. "We've arrived." The Cypress Hollow community was larger and more organized than they had imagined. Built in a valley hidden between cypress groves, it had dozens of cabins, diverse crops, a clear water stream, and even a central area for community meetings. More than 200 people lived there, all having escaped from slavery at different times. They were received with initial caution, then with open arms when Papa Antoine was recognized by some of the elders. The children were immediately fed and sheltered, while Joanna and Joaquina received medical care from the community's healers. Mother Zephyr, the community's spiritual leader, examined Joaquina's wounds with gentle, knowing hands. "This body will heal," she said in a deep voice, "but the soul needs more time." The first few months in the community were ones of adjustment. The girls, accustomed only to forced labor and constant fear, had to learn a new way of living, work with purpose, their own choices, mutual respect. It was a difficult but profoundly transformative transition. Mariana quickly stood out as a natural leader, despite her young age. Her role in organizing the escape had given her a confidence that impressed even the most experienced Maroons. Isabella, with her analytical mind, became an apprentice in the community's makeshift school, absorbing all the knowledge offered to her. Teresa discovered a talent for agriculture, spending hours in the fields. Katerina, always the quietest, found her voice as a storyteller for the younger children. Joaquina took longer to adapt. The traumas she had suffered kept her trapped in a painful silence. It was Joanna, recovered from her own injuries, who slowly managed to bring the girl back, day by day, with infinite patience and unconditional love. Papa Antoine, respected for his wisdom and courage, became an advisor to the community's leader, a former slave named Moses, in honor of the biblical leader who freed his people. Together, they strengthened the community's defenses, expanded communication routes with other Maroon settlements, and organized more rescues of enslaved people from the region's plantations. A year passed. The girls, now 12 years old, had grown in height, strength, and wisdom. The community thrived, increasing in number and organization, but the shadow of the past never completely disappeared. News arrived through sympathetic traders and new fugitives. Colonel Elias Beaufort had intensified the brutality on his plantation after the escape. John Burton, humiliated by the episode, had become even crueler. Periodic searches were organized to find the hidden community, fortunately without success. One night at a council meeting, where all the adults of the community gathered to make important decisions, Mariana asked to speak for the first time. Standing before the community gathered around the central fire, she spoke with surprising clarity and conviction. "We escaped the chains, but many still suffer. Every day that passes, more blood is spilled on the plantations. We cannot just live here in peace while others die." Her words caused a deep silence. Moses, the leader, looked at the girl with respect, but also with concern. "What do you suggest, little warrior?" he asked. "We already rescue many when we can. We do what is possible without risking the entire community." "We need to do more," Mariana insisted. "We need to send a message to show that cruelty has a price." The idea was bold, even reckless. A direct attack on the Bon Secours plantation, not to kill, but to free all the enslaved people and leave Colonel Beaufort without his most valuable property. The debate lasted late into the night. Many feared the consequences: violent reprisals, an intensified search for their community, the possibility of defeat and capture. Others supported the proposal, arguing that a spectacular action would inspire other enslaved people and might even discourage planters in the region. Moses listened to all arguments attentively. When the last person had spoken, he stood up, his tall, strong body illuminated by the fire. "Our freedom is worth little if we do not fight for the freedom of others," he declared, "but we cannot act impulsively. We need a perfect plan, precise information, and proper preparation." It was decided to form a small planning group. Mariana, surprisingly, was included, along with Papa Antoine, Moses, and 3 other experienced warriors from the community. For months they worked on every detail: maps of the plantation drawn from memory, overseers' routines, weak points in the defenses, best escape routes. Joaquina, who had finally begun to speak again, provided valuable information about the changes on the plantation since their escape. She remembered every detail, every schedule, every habit of the masters and overseers. The plan was refined until all possible risks were considered and minimized. They chose the date carefully: Colonel Beaufort's birthday party, when there would be a celebration at the big house and the watch would be reduced and drunk. On the eve of the operation, Mariana met with her 4 sisters of fate. Sitting in a circle inside the cabin they shared, they recalled everything they had been through together. "Tomorrow we return to the place where our nightmares began," Mariana said. "But we return different. We return strong. We return free," Isabella completed. "And we will bring that freedom to others," Teresa added. Katerina, always the most reflective, asked, "And if we find John Burton or the Colonel?" A heavy silence fell over the group. It was a question they had all avoided. Joaquina, who rarely spoke, answered with a soft but firm voice, "We will bring justice. Not vengeance, but justice." The night of the operation arrived, bringing a waning moon that offered just enough light to move, but adequate shadows to hide in. 30 warriors from the community, including Mariana, Isabella, and Joaquina, Teresa and Katerina stayed behind to help prepare the community to receive the new fugitives, set off in silence, moving like shadows through the swamp they knew so well. The approach to the Bon Secours plantation was tense, every noise making them freeze, every movement calculated. They split into 3 groups: one to attack the overseer's house to neutralize them, another to free the enslaved from the quarters, and a third, led by Moses, to serve as protection and rear guard. Mariana, with Joaquina and 5 warriors, had the mission of liberating the quarters. It was the most important task and also the most dangerous, as it would require time to break chains and quickly explain the escape plan. When they reached the edge of the plantation, they could see the lights of the big house and hear the music and laughter from the celebration. The plan seemed to be working. Attention was diverted, the watch reduced. Mariana's group crept through the shadows until they reached the first quarters. The guard, half asleep and likely drunk, was silently subdued. The doors were opened and Mariana entered, finding dozens of frightened eyes looking at her. "We've come to free you," she announced in a low, clear voice. "We are from the Cypress Hollow community. Whoever wants to come, stand up now. We'll break the chains." There was a moment of hesitation, then a murmur of hope ran through the quarters. Men and women stood up, some weeping silently, others with disbelieving smiles. With tools brought from the community, the liberators began to break the chains. Joaquina, recognizing many faces, offered words of encouragement. "Freedom exists," she whispered. "I've been living in it for a year. You will too." In less than an hour, almost all the enslaved people were free and gathered in small groups, ready to follow the Maroon warriors. The operation seemed a complete success, almost miraculous in its efficiency. It was then that everything changed. An overseer, returning unexpectedly from the party, discovered the unconscious guard and immediately sounded the alarm. The sound of a bell ringing frantically cut through the night, followed by shouts and the noise of doors being thrown open. "Run to the meeting point!" Moses shouted to the groups already formed. "Follow the plan!" But the plan had not anticipated a direct confrontation. The Maroon warriors, though brave, were outnumbered and less armed than the overseers and potential reinforcements. Mariana, Joaquina, and Isabella were helping the last of the enslaved to organize when they saw a familiar figure emerging from the darkness, whip in hand and hatred in his eyes. John Burton. Time seemed to freeze. There was the man who had inflicted so much suffering, who had stolen the childhood of so many, who had marked the flesh and soul of everyone on that plantation. "You runaway wenches," he snarled, advancing with his whip raised. "You won't escape this time." Joaquina, who had suffered most directly at this man's hands, took a step forward. Her face, once always haunted by fear, now showed a calm determination. "We are not slaves anymore," she said in a clear voice, "and you have no more power over us." John Burton laughed, a cruel sound that cut the night. "I'll show you who has power, girl." He lashed out with the whip, but Joaquina was ready. She dodged with an agility that surprised everyone, including the overseer himself. Years of forced labor had strengthened her body, and months of training in the community had honed her reflexes. The whip hit empty air, and before John Burton could recover, Mariana and Isabella joined Joaquina. The three girls, now in their early adolescence but with experiences that had aged them inside, faced the man who symbolized all their torment. It was not a long fight. John Burton, confident in his superiority, did not expect real resistance. When the first blows hit him, not lethal but enough to knock him down, the surprise on his face was almost comical. "Tie him up," Mariana ordered, practical as always. "We're taking him with us." "Taking him?" Isabella questioned. "Why?" "So that everyone can see," Mariana replied, "so that everyone knows that monsters can also be defeated." Meanwhile, the rest of the operation entered its critical phase. The groups of freed slaves ran for the swamp, guided by the Maroon warriors. Some overseers tried to pursue them, but were ambushed by strategically placed warriors. At the big house, Colonel Beaufort, alerted by the bell, gathered armed men to defend his property. But it was too late. Most of his property had already disappeared into the darkness on the way to freedom. Mariana's group, carrying a bound and gagged John Burton, was the last to leave the plantation. They met up with Moses at the rendezvous point, where he was organizing the retreat. "We managed to free almost everyone," he reported, his eyes shining with pride. "A few stayed behind, injured or too old for the walk, and we lost 2 warriors." A moment of silence honored the fallen. Then Moses noticed the prisoner. "What is this?" "A testimony," Mariana replied. "So everyone knows it's possible." The journey back to the community was slower than the trip there, with dozens of newly freed people, many weakened by years of forced labor and poor nutrition. They stopped frequently to rest, always alert for signs of pursuit. John Burton, dragged against his will, watched it all with eyes that mixed hatred and disbelief, as if the world built on the certainty of his superiority was crumbling with every step. At dawn, when they finally stopped for a longer rest, Joaquina approached the prisoner. For a moment she just watched him, her eyes conveying more than words could express. "I forgive you," she said finally, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." After that brief moment she walked away, leaving John Burton with his disturbed thoughts. 3 days later, the group arrived at Cypress Hollow. They were received with celebration, songs, drums, hugs, and tears of joy. Teresa and Katerina ran to find their sisters, wrapping them in tight embraces. More than 100 people had been freed that night, nearly doubling the community's population. It would be a challenge to house everyone, to feed every mouth, but it was a challenge they embraced with joy. John Burton was kept prisoner in an isolated cabin under constant guard. Many in the community wanted immediate justice. Some called for his death, others for forms of physical punishment. Moses, however, insisted on a community judgment where everyone could speak and be heard. On the night of the judgment, all the adults of the community gathered around the central fire. John Burton was brought, still bound but ungagged, so he could speak in his own defense. One by one, those who had suffered at his hands told their stories. Scars on backs were revealed, painful memories exposed, tears shed. John Burton, confronted with the real impact of his cruelty for the first time in his life, seemed diminished. When it was his turn to speak, he just muttered, "I did what I was ordered. It was my job." His words were met with a heavy silence. No one there accepted such a justification. The cruelty with which he had executed his orders went far beyond a job. After hours of testimony, Moses stood to announce the decision. "This man represents everything we fight against. He has caused enough suffering for many lifetimes." He paused, looking at each face in the assembly. "But we are not like him. We do not take lives for vengeance." The sentence was announced. John Burton would remain in the community, not as a perpetual prisoner, but as a worker. He would experience the life he had imposed on so many others, but without whips, without chains, without cruelty. He would work in the fields, help build new cabins, and contribute to the community he had tried to destroy. And perhaps, Moses concluded, he will learn what it means to be human. In the days that followed, the community adjusted to its new reality. New cabins were built, fields expanded, responsibilities reorganized. The newcomers, after a lifetime of slavery, had to learn to live in freedom, to make choices, to express opinions, to participate in collective decisions. The 5 girls, now 12-year-old young women, found their places in this growing community. Mariana became Moses's apprentice, preparing to eventually take on leadership. Isabella continued her studies, absorbing knowledge from healers, makeshift teachers, and anyone who had something to teach. Teresa expanded the fields, introducing new agricultural techniques. Katerina became the group's historian, recording their experiences in songs and stories. And Joaquina found her path as a mentor to traumatized children, helping them heal invisible wounds. John Burton, initially resistant, gradually adapted to his new life. The man who had been defined by cruelty now faced a world where that tool had been removed. It was a difficult transition, marked by moments of anger, despair, and even escape attempts. But over time, something began to change in him. Perhaps it was resignation, perhaps it was something deeper. Meanwhile, Colonel Elias Beaufort was driven mad with rage. The loss of almost all his slaves at once represented a devastating financial blow. But more than that, it was a blow to his pride, to his sense of absolute control. He swore revenge, promised generous rewards for the community's location, and pressed local authorities for military action. "I will find that place and burn every cabin," he promised anyone who would listen, "or I'll bring every last slave back in reinforced chains." The threats eventually reached the community through allied traders. Moses and the council intensified security measures, established new lookout posts, and developed evacuation plans in case the worst happened. Amid this growing tension, Mariana sought out John Burton. She found him working in one of the new fields, sweating under the sun, just as so many had sweated under his whip. For a moment, she just watched him. "We need your help," she said finally. John Burton looked at her with suspicion. "My help? For what?" "The colonel is planning to attack us. You know his methods, his resources. You can help us prepare." There was a long silence, during which many emotions crossed the former overseer's face. "Why would you trust me?" he eventually asked. "Why do you think I wouldn't take the chance to escape or betray you?" Mariana looked into the eyes of the man who had caused so much suffering, who had led that first night of horror, who had changed her life and her sister's lives forever. "Because you've seen both sides now," she answered simply. "And I believe that deep down you know which one is right." Another long silence followed. Finally, John Burton nodded slowly. "The colonel has contacts with the state militia," he began. "He can get at least 20 armed men. I know his strategies." In the following weeks, he provided detailed information about the colonel's resources, his likely tactics, and the weak points in his security. It was strange to hear the man who had been a symbol of oppression now actively helping to protect the very people he had persecuted. Some in the community remained suspicious, suspecting a trap. Others saw his knowledge as too valuable to ignore. Meanwhile, Beaufort's attack was inevitable. He would not accept that this resistance could prosper. And on a sunny morning, while everyone was working, lookouts spotted a group of men approaching from the north side of the community, with Beaufort at their head. The alarm was sounded, and the community quickly organized according to the established plans. Children and the elderly were taken to hidden shelters in the swamp. Warriors took up defensive positions. Others prepared to evacuate if necessary. Mariana, along with Moses, climbed an observation platform camouflaged among the tall trees. From there they could see Beaufort's group approaching. About 30 men, most of them armed, led by the colonel on his black horse. "Freedom is an illusion," Beaufort shouted when he was close enough to be heard. "You are not capable of sustaining a community. What you call freedom will only bring chaos." Mariana looked at Moses, who nodded gravely. It was time to show they were not afraid. Climbing down from the platform, Mariana walked to the entrance of the community, where dozens of former slaves were already gathering. Isabella, Joaquina, Teresa, and Caterina joined her, followed by Papa Antoine, Joanna, and other community leaders. "What have you come here for, Beaufort?" Mariana shouted, her chest held high with pride. "No one here is afraid of you." The colonel laughed, a humorless sound. "I've come to take back what is mine by right," he answered. "These slaves are my legal property, and that of the other plantations in the region." "No person can be the property of another," Moses declared, positioning himself beside Mariana. "We are free by natural right, and we will remain so." Beaufort, realizing he would not find easy submission, changed tactics. "Listen, there doesn't have to be violence," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "Come back with me, and I promise fair treatment. Good food, less heavy work, even some days of rest." A murmur of disbelieving laughter ran through the crowd of former slaves. No one there believed such empty promises. It was then that an unexpected figure stepped forward, John Burton. Upon seeing him, Beaufort nearly fell off his horse in surprise. "John, you're alive?" he exclaimed. "These savages kept you prisoner. Come, we'll free you." John Burton looked at his former master with a complex expression. "I am not the prisoner, Colonel," he said, his voice calm but clear. "I have learned another way to live." Beaufort was momentarily speechless, unable to process the betrayal of his most trusted overseer. When he finally found his voice again, it was trembling with fury. "Traitor! You'll pay for this along with them." He turned to his men, preparing to order an attack, but hesitated as he realized something he hadn't noticed before. The community was well defended. Dozens of warriors were positioned strategically, some with bows, others with makeshift spears, all with determination in their eyes. Beaufort was not a fool. He realized that even with his armed men, a direct battle would result in many casualties on both sides. And without John Burton to guide him, he wasn't sure he could find the community again. "This isn't over," he warned, pulling his horse's reins. "I will be back with more men. You'll be nothing but a pile of ashes when I'm finished." "And we'll be waiting," Mariana replied firmly, more prepared every day. Beaufort and his men retreated, leaving the community in a tense silence. When the dust from their departure settled, a spontaneous celebration erupted. Songs, dances, hugs, the joy of having faced the oppressor and remained firm. In the midst of the celebration, Mariana found John Burton standing alone, watching in the distance. She approached him cautiously. "You could have gone with him," she said. "You could have gone back to your old life." John Burton looked at her, then at the celebrating community. "There's no place for me in that life anymore," he replied simply. Mariana nodded, understanding more than his words had said. "Then make your place here," she suggested. In the years that followed, the Cypress Hollow community continued to grow and prosper. New rescue expeditions freed more enslaved people from the region's plantations. Alliances were formed with other maroon communities, creating a network of free settlements that supported each other. The 5 girls, now young women, took on increasingly important roles in the community. Mariana became Moses's main advisor, helping to guide the community through constant challenges. Isabella developed as a teacher and healer, combining traditional African knowledge with what she learned from books obtained through allies in the cities. Teresa led the agricultural production, ensuring that no one went hungry, even in the most difficult winters. Caterina preserved the community's history and culture, teaching the children where they came from and why freedom was so precious. And Joaquina, having finally healed her deepest wounds, became a respected mediator, helping to resolve conflicts and promote harmony. John Burton never became a full part of the community. There were too many painful memories, too many traumas he had caused, but he found his place as an advisor on matters of defense, using his knowledge of the oppressor's methods to strengthen the community's protections. And over time, some began to see him not just for what he had been, but for what he was trying to become. Beaufort attempted 2 more attacks over the years, each one failing in the face of the community's growing strength and organization. Eventually, ruined financially by the loss of his workforce and consumed by hatred, he died alone on his decaying plantation. In the spring of 1865, when the news of the Confederate surrender and the Emancipation Proclamation finally reached Cypress Hollow, there was celebration, but also a sense of deeper accomplishment. For those who already lived in freedom, won by their own hands, the government's decree was a late recognition of what they already knew, that they were and always had been deserving of dignity and self-determination. That night, around the large central fire, Mariana, now a 22-year-old woman, looked at her sisters. They had come a long way since that terrible night in the quarters of the Bon Secours plantation. "We built this," she said, gesturing to the thriving community around them. "From something horrible, we created something beautiful." Isabella smiled, her eyes reflecting the flames. "And it will continue long after us, for our children," Teresa added, gently touching her pregnant belly. "And for their children," Katerina completed, "free from birth." Joaquina, who rarely spoke in large groups, stood up and walked to the center of the circle. Everyone fell silent, for when she spoke, her words always carried weight. "From enslaved children to free women," she said, her clear voice reaching everyone present. "This is our story, and it is a story that must be told, so that no one forgets the price of freedom or the power of resistance." As the drums began to beat and voices joined in songs of celebration, 5 women stood together, their hands intertwined, forming an unbreakable circle. They had survived the unthinkable, transformed pain into strength, and built a legacy that would echo for generations. The slave quarters were far behind, but their lesson remained. Even in the darkest of circumstances, human dignity can prevail, and from the resistance of a few, the freedom of many is born.